Well, hello, this is Dr. Bev Knox, your psychology exam study buddy. Today we're going to be looking at nature, nurture, and human diversity. As you know, I do this in two parts. The first part is all about theory and assisting you to ace your psychology exam. The second part, I will go over actual questions and answers from an actual psychology exam. Okay, are you ready? So let's get started. In regards to behavior genetics, we need to first start off with the definition. So, behavior genetics is the study of the relative power and limits of genetic and environmental influences on behavior. So, behavior genetics is the study of the relative power. And again, I will be going very slowly and repeating myself several times. Behavior genetics is the study of the relative power and limits of genetic and environmental influences on behavior. So we'll get to nature nurture in a minute, but nature would be the genetics part, the biological part, and nurture would be the environmental part. So, what is behavior genetics? Behavior genetics is the study of the relative power and limits of genetic and environmental influences. There's a great example that's given to explain this, and it talks about Beyonce's and Jay-Z's daughter, Blue Ivy, who grows up to be a popular recording artist. Let's just say she grew up and she became a very popular recording artist. Should we attribute her musical talent to her superstar genes, to her growing up in a musically rich environment, to high expectations? Such questions intrigue those who study behavior genetics, who study our differences and weigh the effects of the interplay at hereditary and environment. So, behavior genetics is the study of the relative power and limits of genetic and environmental influences on behavior. What is behavior genetics? That's right. It is the study of the relative power and limits of genetic and environmental influences. Now, hereditary. The word hereditary is the genetic transfer of characteristics from parents to offspring. Hereditary is the genetic transfer of characteristics from parents to offspring. What is hereditary? The genetic transfer of characteristics from parents to offspring. So let's talk about genes for a minute. Our codes for life. It is important to note that in regards to chromosomes, and the definition of chromosomes is thread-like structures made of DNA molecules that contain the genes. So chromosome, and you have to know that definition. Thread-like structures of DNA molecules that contain the gene. All right, so chromosome is composed of a coiled chain of the molecule DNA, small segments of the giant DNA molecules. And in regards to chromosomes, 23 chromosomes is donated by your mother's egg and 23 by your father's sperm. This is definitely on the quiz, so you need to know it, okay? How many chromosomes in each part of the human cell? 23 from mom, 23 from dad, which makes up 46, and that is the answer. Okay, 46. So chromosomes are thread-like structures made up of DNA molecules that contain the genes. And DNA in itself is a complex molecule containing the genetic information that makes up the chromosomes. DNA is a complex molecule containing the genetic information that makes up the chromosomes. So chromosomes is a thread-like structure made of DNA molecules that contain the genes. And DNA is a complex molecule containing the genetic information that makes up the chromosomes. Now, genes are the biological, basically the biochemical units of hereditary that make up the chromosomes. So genes are the biochemical units of hereditary that make up the chromosomes. Segments of DNA capable of utilizing different proteins. Now, generally speaking, every other human is narrowly your identical twin. Humans' genome researchers have discovered a common sequence within the human DNA. This shared genetic profile is what makes us human rather than tulips or bananas or chimpanzees. Yet, we aren't all that different from our chimpanzee cousins. At a genetic level, humans and chimpanzees are 96% identical. That's right, 96% identical. At functionally important DNA sites, this number reaches 99.4%. Yet that we, and I'm going to say a very, very small percentage here, that we 0.6% difference really matters. So a genome is the complete instructions for making an organism, consisting of all the genetic material in the organism's chromosomes. A genome is the complete instructions for making an organism, consisting of all the genetic material that is in that organism's chromosomes. Here's another great little story. Imagine the plans for your own book of life runs 46 chapters. Just imagine your book of life has 46 chapters. And we're speaking in DNA and genes and genomes, okay? 23 chapters donated by your mom's egg and 23 chapters by your father's sperm. Each of these 46 chapters, called a chromosome, is composed of a coiled chain of the molecule DNA. Genes, small segments of the giant DNA molecules, form the words of the chapters. Now, altogether, you have some 20,000 genes, which are either active, which is called expressed, or inactive. So these genes are either active or inactive. Now, environmental events turn on genes, rather like hot water enabling a tea bag to express its flavor. Then turned on. So when these genes are turned on, they provide the code for creating protein molecules, our body's building blocks. So first of all, when we speak of environment, we're talking about every non-genetic influence from prenatal nutrition to the people and things that surround us. So when we're talking about environment or environmental influences, you need to think every non-genetic influence from prenatal nutrition to the people and things around us. So I just wanted to go over the difference between identical and fraternal twins. A lot of the research that is done on behavior genetics are done on twins. So first off, an identical twin, also known as monozygotic, okay? So you have a monozygotic and also you have a dizygotic. So the identical twin, which is the mono meaning one, so remember that, okay? Identical twin, monozygotic twin, develops from a single fertilized egg that splits in two, creating two genetically identical organisms. And we have to understand this. So, with identical twins, they develop from a single fertilized egg that splits. Thus, they are genetically identical. Nature's own human clones. Indeed, they are clones who share not only the same genes, but the same conception and uterus, and usually the same birth date and cultural history. Now, there's two slight qualifications. Although identical twins have the same genes, they don't always have the same number of copies of those genes repeated within their genome. That variation helps explain why one twin may have a greater risk for certain illnesses and disorders. So that's important to note, that even though they are identical twins and they have the same genes, they don't always have the same number of copies of those genes repeated within the same genome. Now, the other thing we have to take into account is that most identical twins share a placenta during prenatal development, but one of every 3 sets has separate placentas. One twin's placenta may provide slightly better nourishment, which may contribute to a few identical twin differences. Now that's something to know. So even though most identical twins share the placenta, there are some that do not. They have separate placentas, okay? So again, identical twins develop from a single fertilized egg that splits in two, creating two genetically identical organisms. So what is an identical twin? What does that mean? That's right. Identical twins, also known as monozygotic twins, develop from a single fertilized egg, one egg, that splits in two, creating two genetically identical organisms. Now, fraternal twins, right? Fraternal twins develop from separate fertilized eggs. They are genetically no closer than ordinary brothers and sisters, but they share a prenatal environment. Fraternal twins develop from two separate fertilized eggs. As fetal partners, they share a prenatal environment, but they are genetically no more similar than ordinary brothers and sisters. Shared genes can translate to shared experiences. Let's move on to the issue of temperament and hereditary. So, temperament is a person's characteristic emotional reactivity and intensity. So, temperament is a person's characteristic emotional reactivity and intensity. So, as most parents will tell you after having their second child, babies differ even before gulping their first breath. One aspect of personality is temperament, which is what? An emotional reactivity and excitability. Now, this word you will find on my exams in regards to what temperament is, especially when it comes to babies, to infants. How could you tell an infant temperament what it is? By their emotional reactivity and excitability. Now, the most emotional reactive newborns tend to also to be the most reactive 9-month-olds. Emotionally intense preschoolers tend to become relatively intense young adults. In one study of more than 900 New Zealanders, emotionally reactive and impulsive 3-year-olds develop into somewhat more impulsive, aggressive, and conflict-prone 21-year-olds. So, what is temperament? That's right. It is a person's characteristic emotional reactivity and intensity. Okay, so heritability is the proportion of variation among individuals in a group that we can attribute to genes. The heritability of a trait may vary depending on the range of populations and environments studied. Now, interaction is the interplay that occurs when the effect of one factor, such as the environment, depends on another factor, such as hereditary. So that word interaction, okay, it is the interplay, how they play together, how they relate to one another, in other words. The interplay that occurs when the effect of one factor, such as the environment, depends on another factor, such as hereditary. Now, let us move on to epigenetics because that's important when speaking of the whole nature versus nurture debate in psychology. Okay? Epigenetics is above or in addition to, which is the epi part, epigenetics. So above or in addition to genetics, the study of environmental influences on gene expression that occur without a DNA change. That's very, 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 very important to know. Okay? So, epigenetics triggers, there are triggers that switch genes on and off. So, genes can be either active, which basically means expressed, as hot water activates the tea bag, like we talked about earlier, or inactive. So they could either be active or inactive. Now, epigenetics, and again, meaning in addition to or above and beyond genetics, studies the molecular mechanisms by which environments can trigger or block genetic expression. And I know you're like, what? Is that possible? Yes, yes. Environment can actually trigger, they could actually block genetic expression, right? So genes are self-regulating. Rather than acting as blueprints that lead to the same results no matter the context, genes react. So an African butterfly that is green in summer turns brown in the fall thanks to temperature control genetic switch. The same genes that produced green in one situation will produce brown in another situation. This is really, really interesting stuff when you think about it, right? Because I know you've been thinking whether you are the way you are due to nature or nurture. Now we have what is called the new science, and epigenetics is called the new science, right? So again, epigenetics is what? Above or in addition to genetics. The study of environmental influences on gene expression that occur without a DNA change. Now, these environmental factors, such as diet, drugs, and stress, can affect the epigenetic molecules that regulate gene expression. Epigenetics provides a mechanism by which the effects of childhood trauma, poverty, or malnutrition may last a lifetime. Our life events can mark us at the deepest level. Epigenetics research may solve some scientific mysteries, such as why only one member of an identical twin pair may develop a genetically influenced mental disorder. Epigenetics can also help explain why identical twins may look slightly different. Researchers studying mice have found that in utero exposure to certain chemicals can cause genetically identical twins to have different colored fur. Okay, so this ends this section on the nature versus nurture and behavior genetics. I'm going to leave it there because I really just want this episode to focus on nature versus nurture. So to end, I just want to make sure that you are fully aware of the difference between the nature versus nurture controversy in psychology. So the nature part is one's biological and genetic influences, okay? What makes that person, quote unquote, that person, their traits, their characteristics, everything. The nature perspective would be biological or genetic makeup. Okay. The nurture perspective would be environmental influences contribute to this effect. So nature is biological or genetic, and nurture is environmental influences that begins in the womb. Okay, that begins in the womb, and that is what you have to remember. All right, so this is Dr. Bev Knox, and I am going to end here. And in the next episode, we are going to go over actual questions and answers on your psych exam. Okay, so I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.